Alberta issues need Alberta conversation. You're about to go inside the stories with Rob Breakenridge on News Talk 770, 974 Talk, 974-8255. Online at newstalk770.com. The Rob Breakenridge Show starts now.
And let's get to it. Hour number 2 of the Rob Breakenridge Show on this Thursday evening. Appreciate you being with us here tonight. You can reach us, 1-800-563-7770. You can fire off your tweets to us as well, at Rob Breakenridge. You can also find us on the web. RobBreakenridge.com is our website. Audio from past shows, blog entries, and other website kind of stuff. It's all there. We've got some other issues to get to in this hour, some time for your calls, but I do want to begin in this hour with the conversation about highway speed limits. How do we know that the numbers we see on those speed limit signs are the numbers that should be there? Who came up with that? And are those the numbers that are there because that's the highest safe speed one can drive on those highways? Or are there other reasons why those numbers are there? Interestingly, in 2003, the BC government conducted a review of highway speeds, and in fact, there were recommendations that speed limits on certain stretches be increased even to as high as 120 kilometers per hour. Well, the BC government did not act on that. The highest you'll find in BC is 110. Like in Alberta. In fact, on many highways in BC, it's only 90 or 100 kilometers an hour. So the BC government's going to take another look at this. Maybe some vindication for our next guest, self-proclaimed driver's advocate. And he's been pushing this issue, fighting this issue, testing the limits, I guess, of this issue for a number of years. He's co-founder of the group SENSE, Safety by Education, Not Speed Enforcement. You can read more about their work at sense.bc.ca. They got a great video up there explaining some of these issues, if you want to check that out. But joining us here tonight, the aforementioned Ian Tootill joins us. Ian, great to talk to you here. Welcome to the program.
Thanks, Rob.
All right. Well, as I say, I mean, you've been pursuing this issue for some time. You've made it a real crusade of yours. Why do you feel so strongly about this?
Well, I feel strongly about it because, like everybody else in Canada, or like most people in Canada, I'm a driver, and I don't like feeling like I'm a criminal every time I get on the highways and disobey speed limits. 80% of the drivers on some of the highways are going over the posted limit, and that puts us all at risk of what amounts to an arbitrary speeding tax every time we go out and drive.
And this, I mean, I guess these numbers are arbitrary. Maybe some people assume that whatever the number is, it's there for a reason. What's your experience and your understanding from doing the research of how we're determining these limits in the first place?
Well, this is the crux of the issue, is the way that the limits are actually set in the first place. They're basically set politically. They're not set scientifically. And what we're advocating is the correct setting of speed limits using something as recommended by the Institute of Transportation Engineers. It's called the 85th percentile. And it's basically, to simplify it, it's the upper end of safe travel speed by the reasonable majority that's setting the limit at that speed, so that the reasonable and safe actions of the majority of drivers are made legal.
Now, there are those who would say that slower speed limits are safer speed limits, but you suggest the opposite, that slower speed limits actually contribute to accidents.
Well, no, I don't suggest that, but what I do suggest is that, and it's based, or backed by fact, is that speed limits are not the primary determinant of travel speeds on roads. Okay. So people that are that are making a false assumption that by raising the speed limits you're actually raising travel speeds really need to take a look at what it is that determines travel speed in the first place. People always talk about safely going with the flow of traffic. Well, it's actually it's true. If you're driving with the flow of traffic, you're probably driving safest. So what is a cause of crashes? A lot of people assume it's speed, which is a cause of crashes. It's not. But speed variance can be a cause of crashes. That's the difference in travel speeds between vehicles. So if you've got some people driving very slow and some people driving very fast, when those vehicles interact, that's when you have the possibility of a crash and an injury. So a lot of out here in BC anyway, our insurance corporation, its sole focus over the last 20 years seems to have been to slow everybody down on the assumption that when drivers actually have a collision, that they will do less damage to themselves and therefore cost the insurance company less money. Our focus is on, or the principle that we're operating on, is that we want to prevent the crash happening in the first place. And to do that, you minimize speed variance. So if everybody on the highway is doing 125 to 130 and you've got a speed limit of 100, something's out of kilter.
And it almost is accepted in some cases. I know here in Alberta, the highway between Edmonton and Calgary, I mean, ostensibly it's a 110 speed limit, but it's a very wide, mostly straight highway, and it's pretty rare to actually see anybody doing 110, and you get the sense that police aren't really pulling people over unless they are, as you say, standing up from the pack or going at excessive speed. So given that it's almost already accepted in some cases that people are going to speed, what are we to make of that?
Well, when the police do decide, there's these periods of détente that go on in British Columbia. For a while they focus on one thing, they leave people alone, so everybody gets lulled into this sense of complacency, thinking that they're not at risk and that they're not a target. But the reality is, if you're going 1 kilometer an hour over the speed limit and you get a ticket and you go to court and you try and defend it, you're going to be plain out of luck. And what makes the issue even more acute and important at this time is that we've, since 2010 in British Columbia, had changes to the Motor Vehicle Act that include administrative motor vehicle seizures by the police. So they're able, at 40 kilometers an hour over the posted limit, they're obliged, if they charge you with excessive speed, they're obliged to seize your vehicle on the spot and leave you there.
Yeah.
And this has caught 18,000 drivers in British Columbia in this snare. And tourists as well. There are people from Alberta that come to BC,
Right.
been surprised to learn that they've been stranded by the side of the road with this law. So if you don't have the correct baseline set in the first place, I don't see how you can justify taking cars away at 40 kilometers an hour over the speed limit.
Well, and it speaks to this attitude that police and lawmakers are trying to get across. We see all these campaigns, that speed kills, speed is dangerous, people who are speeding are as bad as drunk drivers. What do you make of this kind of message that's being conveyed?
Well, it's a rationalization of what they've got to do. And it's also a direct outcome of some absolutely ridiculous mission statements that are put up for these people that they have to operate under. For instance, in British Columbia, the superintendent of motor vehicles actually has a mission statement saying that their objective is 0 fatalities on British Columbia highways. Now, when you've got kinetic energy involved and humans driving motor vehicles, it's an absolutely impossible mission. I know it sounds callous to say this, but I mean, the reality is that we accept a certain amount of risk in order to have the convenience and necessity of transportation. So,
But I mean, clearly some roads are only meant to handle certain speeds. I mean, we see that in cities. Some roads are 50, some roads are 80, and there are various factors that play into what's what. Now, I was driving through BC, parts of BC on the Trans-Canada this summer. Some stretches are 100, some are 90. There are some corners where it slows down even less than that. Obviously, certainly parts through the mountains. So, I mean, clearly there are going to be circumstances where we have to say, a certain lower speed limit needs to apply. But how do we make those determinations?
Well, first of all, Rob, let's separate city streets from highways for a minute here. City streets are a whole other ball game. School zones, playgrounds, all that kind of stuff. What we're talking about is highways that are built for speed. Mm-hmm. And I'd rather not focus on what you just talked about. I'd rather focus on the methodology. And if you understand the methodology for measuring speeds and setting speed limits, as recommended by the Institute for Transportation Engineers, you realize that the point that you made really has not a lot to do with it. The methodology is that over a period of time, under a variety of conditions, without the threat of law enforcement, you measure the free flow of traffic over a period of time, like I said, and you come up with a bell curve of travel speeds. And generally, not generally, but the recommendation by these professionals is that if you set the limit at the upper end of that safe travel speed under ideal conditions, you will have the maximum compliance and the minimal necessity for enforcement, and you will find that your safety is optimized. That's the way it works.
Okay.
So, for instance, if you've got a roadway where everybody wants to do 110, regardless of what the speed limit is, or up to 110, then that's the safest point to set that limit at. And the speed limit on the side of the road has nothing to do with it. And the rationale is based on the acknowledgement and acceptance that the best person to determine the travel speed of the motor vehicle is the driver responsible for the vehicle. And that driver makes that determination based on condition of vehicle, ability to drive, condition of the road, weather conditions, engineering, a whole raft of things. So these other criteria that come into play or are thrown in here by various groups in government, at the end of the day are just really muddying the water, unless there's really an exceptional circumstance. Obviously there's the odd occasion where a road is engineered for a certain speed, and people tend to overdrive it, and there's a surprise there, maybe a badly engineered corner or a surprise intersection. But in those circumstances, people should be conditioned to pay attention to the signs, and we don't pay attention to the signs because all of us have been lulled into complacency and we've grown to ignore them.
What do you say to the argument, and I've heard it made many times, that if you increase speed limits, the fact that people already drive over the speed limit, that means people are just going to speed even more, that if you have a road that's 90, people are already driving over that. If you raise it, that means people are going to be going even faster.
Yeah, commonly held false belief based on the assumption, again, that speed limits are the prime determination of how fast people travel. They are not what determines how fast people travel. Like you said, if you go on that straight highway that you're talking about in Alberta, you'll notice that most people aren't driving the speed limit. They're driving based on the design of the road, the condition of their vehicle, the speed of the other traffic, and the weather. And that's just the way it is. That's the way it is globally. We have some of the best roads in the world. We have some of the best motor vehicles. We're no dumber than the rest of the planet. And the rest of the industrialized world, more or less, have higher speed limits than us. The U.S. finally took away their federally mandated 55-mile-an-hour limit that was set back in the 70s to deal with the oil embargo. They took that away in 1996, and since then, 37 states have raised their speed limits. Some as high as 138 kilometers an hour. And what those states are finding is that carnage hasn't increased, and they're finding that compliance has gone up, and there's less necessity for the police to be out there issuing tickets.
Well, and of course, Montana had experimented with having no speed limits on certain highways. We see that in Europe with the Autobahn. I mean, is that something to look at?
Well, I'm not. The National Post wrote that I'm advocating that we remove speed limits altogether. I mean, I might have my personal fantasies about it, but we're not advocating that at all. Montana did it, and it wasn't bad for them for whatever reason. They decided to go with the speed limit again. I'm not sure what it is today, but it's quite high. But what you find in places where there are no speed limits, like the sections of the Autobahns in Germany where there are no speed limits, is generally traffic tends to travel at 130 to 140 anyway. Mm-hmm. So, yes, people can go in the left-hand lane quite fast. In some cases they do. But the masses are traveling at the speeds that they generally travel in the rest of the world, which is 130 to 140.
Well, getting back to this review that's going to take place in BC, another review was done about a decade ago. Nothing really came of that. Do you expect much to happen this time around?
Well, I never expect anything with government, but I can hope and I can believe. And I do believe that this time around we have momentum because they can look around now and they can see, the changes in North America really started to take place, as I said, with the U.S. taking the lead in 1996. And, there's a trend taking place here, and it's taking place all around the world. Netherlands adopted a change to their speed limits 2 years ago, and the minister in Netherlands, I think the tagline they used was faster where possible, slower where necessary. That was their purpose. Yeah. And I think that's a very good one. I think that makes sense for us here. I think we should be using our roads as they're designed and paid to be used. and stop clobbering people for using roads as intended, and deploy police resources to things that are more important.
Well, we'll let people know they can read more about the work your group is doing. The website is sense.bc.ca. Ian, it's been great talking to you.